The blue and red lights flashed behind Samuel Crawford's hovercar as he drove down the elevated highway in New Atlanta. Samuel was 73 years old and his hands shook a little as he moved his car to the side of the road. The year was 2187, and humans now lived on Mars and other planets, but some things never changed. Samuel had seen this happen before in his long life, and he knew what might come next. Officer Derek Hayes sat in his police cruiser and watched the old man pull over. Derek was 37 years old and had been a cop for 15 years. He looked at the expensive car and the well-dressed black man inside, and he felt something twist in his chest. It was a mix of anger and greed that he had learned to use over the years. Derek turned on his body camera and stepped out of his vehicle. The camera would record everything, but Derek knew how to make sure certain recordings disappeared when needed. Samuel watched the officer walk toward him in his mirror. He saw the way Derek's hand rested on his weapon, and the confident walk that said this officer expected no trouble. Samuel lowered his window and kept his hands where Derek could see them. His face showed nothing but calm, even though his heart beat fast in his chest. Derek reached the window and looked down at Samuel with cold eyes. He spoke in a flat voice that had no warmth in it at all. "License and registration." Samuel handed over his identification chip without saying anything. Derek took it and scanned it with the device on his wrist. Information flooded across the small screen. The old man was Dr. Samuel Crawford, and he had been a scientist who studied alien life on Mars. He was retired now and had a clean record that went back 50 years. Derek's eyes caught on one piece of information that made him pause. Samuel had just withdrawn 75,000 credits from his bank in cash. Derek felt excitement rush through him, but he kept his face blank. Cash was rare in 2187, when most people used digital credits for everything. Someone carrying this much physical money was unusual, and Derek had learned to see unusual things as opportunities. He looked back at Samuel and his voice got harder. "Step out of the vehicle." Samuel's heart sank, but he did what he was told. His old knees hurt as he stood up and the earth's gravity felt heavier than it should. Derek began searching the car and his movements were slow and deliberate. He wanted Samuel to feel afraid and powerless. It did not take long to find what he was looking for. Under the passenger seat was a slim metal case with a lock that needed Samuel's fingerprint to open. Derek pulled it out and held it up. "What is this?" Samuel kept his voice steady even though fear crawled up his spine like ice. "That is my property, officer. It has money for my grandson's medical surgery. The insurance will not pay for it, so I saved the money myself." Derek's face got harder and meaner. "Carrying this much cash looks suspicious to me. Could be drug money or payment for illegal activities. I'm going to take this for investigation." Samuel felt his world crack apart. "Officer, please. My grandson needs surgery soon or the damage to his brain will be permanent." "He is only 8 years old." Derek did not care at all. "You should have thought about that before you decided to do something suspicious. You will get a receipt, and if everything is clean, you might get your money back." What Samuel did not know was that 3 months ago, the FBI had started watching Derek Hayes in his police precinct. They noticed that officers were stopping people and taking their money and property without good reason. The pattern was clear. Most of the victims were old people or people of color, and the seized money often disappeared or got smaller before it reached the evidence room. Special Agent Linda Martinez had been building a case against these corrupt cops for months. Linda was smart and patient, and she had a plan. She got legal permission to mark certain bills with tiny quantum trackers that were invisible to the naked eye. These trackers could follow the money anywhere it went through any transaction or any distance. When Samuel's grandson heard his grandfather was going to withdraw cash for the surgery, he remembered news reports about corrupt police in New Atlanta. The boy called the FBI tip line and told them what his grandfather was planning. Linda saw the opportunity immediately and had the bank mark every single bill that Samuel withdrew. Now Linda sat 12 miles away in an office building watching multiple screens. One screen showed Derek's body camera feed. Another showed Samuel's medical implant data tracking his heartbeat and stress levels. Traffic cameras gave her different angles of the scene, but the most important screen showed the quantum signatures of the marked bills glowing bright on her display. Every single one of the 75,000 credits that Samuel carried had a tracker that would tell Linda exactly where the money went. Linda had been tracking Derek for 8 months. On paper, he looked like a hero cop who had won medals for bravery during the Mars Wars. But his arrest record showed a different story. He stopped black and brown people far more than white people. He seized property from the elderly more than from young people. The department's computer system should have caught this pattern, but someone had programmed them to ignore it or the alerts were being deleted. Next to Linda sat Agent Carlos Reyes, who was monitoring all communications. We have clear audio confirmation. Derek is filling out the seizure paperwork right now. He used his badge to override the biometric lock on the case. Linda leaned closer to her screens. How much is he logging into evidence? Carlos tapped his screen and brought up the official report that Derek was filing in real time. 40,000 credits. He is stealing 35,000 and only reporting 40 to the evidence system. Linda smiled, but there was no happiness in it. We have him on video and audio stealing from an elderly veteran. But we wait. I want to see where he takes the money and who else is involved in this corruption. Back on the highway, Derek sealed the case in an evidence bag and walked back to Samuel. He handed the old man a data chip. This has your receipt and information about how to appeal the seizure. If you are innocent, you will get your money back eventually. Both men knew this was a lie. Samuel had lived long enough to know that once police took your property, you almost never got it back. The system was designed to make it nearly impossible to recover seized assets, even if you had done nothing wrong. Derek walked back to his cruiser feeling satisfied with himself. He had just made more money in 10 minutes than he made in a month of actual police work. He waited until Samuel drove away before he pulled out his personal communicator. He typed a brief coded message. Package secured. Meeting at usual place. The reply came 30 seconds later. Confirmed. What Derek did not know was that the FBI had hacked his supposedly secure communications 6 months ago. Every message he sent and every person he contacted was being recorded and analyzed. Linda was not interested in catching just one corrupt cop. She wanted the entire network of corruption that stretched through the police department. She wanted everyone involved to face justice. Linda watched Derek's message appear on her screen and spoke to Carlos without looking away from her displays. Get the tactical team ready. We follow Derek to the meeting, but we do not interfere yet. I want to see who else shows up and what they do with the money. Carlos nodded and began making calls to assemble the surveillance team. Samuel drove home with tears running down his face. He had to tell his daughter Nicole that the money he saved for 3 years was gone. He had to tell her that her son Marcus might never get the surgery that could save him from permanent brain damage. Nicole would be heartbroken, and Marcus would not understand why the police officer took away his chance to get better. Above Samuel's car, 3 small FBI drones followed him home to make sure he was safe. Above Derek's cruiser, 3 more drones tracked his every movement as he drove toward the meeting place, where he would split the stolen money with his corrupt partners. The warehouse sat on the edge of the old shipping district, where large metal containers used to arrive from other planets before everything went digital. The building looked abandoned and falling apart from the outside, but inside it had expensive security systems and equipment that jammed any signals trying to get in or out. This was where Derek Hayes and his partners met to divide up the money they stole from people. Derek parked his police cruiser in a spot hidden from the main road and turned off all his official tracking systems. He thought he was being smart and careful, but what he actually did was trigger alerts in the FBI monitoring center. Linda Martinez saw the alerts pop up on her screens and she smiled. He's at the warehouse. This is the meeting location we have been watching for months. Derek walked into the warehouse through a side door and found 5 other officers waiting for him inside. Lieutenant Paul Dixon was a 60-year-old cop who had been on the force for 30 years. He owned 3 expensive houses that no honest cop could afford. Sergeant Karen Wells had gambling debts that first pulled her into the corruption network. Officers Jake Romano and Chris Butler were younger men who had been recruited into stealing within their first year as cops. And then there was Captain Frank Morrison, who was the leader of the entire operation. Morrison was 62 years old and only 3 months away from retirement. He planned to take all his stolen money and move to the Titan colony, where Earth law enforcement could not touch him. He had spent 20 years building this network of corrupt cops, and he was very good at picking officers who were greedy and prejudiced enough to steal without feeling guilty about it. Morrison's voice was cold and commanding when he spoke. "Well, Hayes, what did you bring us?" Derek opened the evidence case and dumped the marked bills onto a metal table. 75,000 from an old black man who will not cause us any trouble. I logged 40,000 in the evidence system. This is what we split between us. Outside the warehouse in a van that looked like a normal maintenance vehicle, Linda and her team watched everything through tiny cameras they had hidden in the walls months ago. The video quality was perfect and clear. Every face was recorded. Every voice was identified. But more important than that, the quantum trackers in the bills were sending out signals that created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Morrison picked up several bills and looked at them carefully. "You were careful. No witnesses who will make trouble." Derek nodded and felt proud of himself. "Clean stop. Old black man with expensive clothes and a large cash withdrawal. Perfect target. Body camera footage shows a legal seizure. Even if he complains, it is his word against mine, and we know how that goes." Romano laughed, and it was a harsh, ugly sound. "They always complain. Never does any good, though." Morrison started dividing the money into 6 equal piles on the table. The routine was practiced and smooth because they had done this many times before. Each officer knew exactly what their share would be. They had been stealing like this for years, and some of them had been doing it for more than a decade. The police department's internal affairs division had investigated them twice before and found nothing wrong. The corrupt officers had friends in powerful positions and union representatives who protected them no matter what they did. The public usually believed that if someone had their money seized by police, they probably deserved it anyway. "This is our biggest month yet." Wells said this as she put her money into her pockets. "Between all our different operations, we are looking at nearly 500,000 credits." Morrison smiled like a snake. "And it will continue for a long time. The new police chief is one of us. He knows what we do and he protects us. We have at least 3 more years before anyone even thinks about looking at our activities." In the surveillance van, Carlos shook his head in disgust. The arrogance is unbelievable. They actually think they are safe. Linda's face stayed calm and professional, but her jaw was tight with anger. That arrogance is going to destroy them. "Carlos, are we recording everything perfectly? Every word, every face, every bill? The quantum markers are working exactly as designed. We can trace this money anywhere it goes after they split it up." The meeting went on for another 20 minutes, and the officers talked about their future plans. They discussed who they would target next and how they could improve their methods. They celebrated their success. They talked about the people they had victimized like they were discussing ordinary business deals. They showed no awareness that their victims were real human beings whose lives they had destroyed. Derek mentioned Samuel Crawford briefly. Retirement money, he said, without any care or feeling. He was going to waste it on some medical procedure for his grandson. Better in our hands than giving it to some expensive hospital. The casual cruelty of his words hit Linda like a punch. She had been in law enforcement for 20 years and had seen corruption before. But this level of callousness toward an elderly man trying to save his grandson still shocked her. Finally, the meeting ended and the officers left separately. They spaced out their exits by several minutes to avoid suspicion. Derek was the last one to leave because he had been assigned to clean up the warehouse and make sure no evidence was left behind. He wiped down the table carefully and checked the floor for any dropped bills. He activated the security system and locked the door behind him. As his cruiser disappeared into the night, Linda felt satisfied, but she kept her emotions controlled. "We have everything we need now. Financial records with video proof. Recorded conversations that show intent and conspiracy. The quantum markers creating an unbreakable chain from the moment Derek seized the money to this distribution. But we are not finished yet. I want to document where every single dollar goes from here. I want to identify every person who touches this dirty money and charge them all." The investigation had moved from gathering evidence to preparing for arrests and trials. But Linda was patient and careful. She had spent 8 months building this case against Derek alone, and months more investigating the larger network. A few more weeks to make sure everything was absolutely perfect would mean the difference between convictions that stuck and cases that fell apart in court. Meanwhile, Samuel sat in his living room trying to explain to his daughter Nicole what had happened. Nicole stood by the window with tears running down her face as he told her the money was gone. Her 8-year-old son Marcus slept upstairs not knowing that his grandfather's plan to save him had failed. 3 years, Nicole whispered. "You saved for 3 years. We were so close to getting Marcus his surgery." Samuel held the data chip Derek had given him, but his hands were shaking. The information on the chip described an appeals process that would take many months. Even if they won the appeal, which seemed unlikely, the money would not come back in time. Marcus needed his surgery before he turned 9 years old, or the brain damage would become permanent. Samuel's voice was quiet and bitter. I saw it in that officer's eyes. He knew exactly what he was doing. This was not about law enforcement or justice. It was theft, pure, simple theft. and he knew I could not do anything to stop him. Nicole turned away from the window and her voice was full of both anger and despair. We have to fight this. There must be someone who can help us. A lawyer or the news media or someone who cares about justice. Samuel looked at his daughter and his voice was tired and bitter. With what money, Nicole? Every credit I had was in that case the officer took. And you know as well as I do that the system protects its own. How many times have we seen this same story? How many families like ours have been crushed by people with badges who never face any consequences? What neither Samuel nor Nicole knew was that their case was different from all the others. Marcus had been following news broadcasts about corrupt police in New Atlanta, even though he was only 8 years old. When his grandfather announced he was going to withdraw cash for the surgery, Marcus used his school computer to contact the FBI tip line. He gave them details about the planned withdrawal and the date it would happen. Agent Linda Martinez had personally responded to that tip, and she immediately saw the opportunity it gave her. She arranged for the quantum markers in the bills and positioned her surveillance teams. She had turned what could have been another forgotten victim into the center of a massive federal investigation, but Linda could not reveal the ongoing operation to the Crawford family yet. Not until all the arrests were made. Samuel and Nicole and Marcus had to believe they had lost everything. If they hired lawyers or contacted the media too soon, they might accidentally warn Derek and his network. The corrupt cops might destroy evidence or run away before the FBI could arrest them. The investigation required the family's real, authentic despair and suffering. It was a cruel calculation, and Linda struggled with the moral weight of it. She had authorized the quantum marker operation knowing it would put an innocent family through hell. The decision kept her awake at night. But she also knew this case could bring down a corruption network that had victimized hundreds of families over many years. Sometimes justice required sacrifice and someone had to make the hard choices. That night, Samuel lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He thought about his years on Mars studying alien life forms. He thought about how that work had expanded humanity's understanding of the universe. He thought about the promise of the future and the dream of a better world that had driven humans to spread across the solar system. And he thought about how in the end that better world had not arrived for people who looked like him. The next morning, Nicole called her job and said she was sick so she could stay home. She spent hours on her computer researching civil asset forfeiture laws. She read case after case of families who had lost everything to police seizures and never got their property back. The pattern was very clear. The system was designed not for justice but to generate money for police departments. Police agencies made budgets based on how much they expected to seize. Officers were given incentives to take property, and the burden of proof was backwards. Victims had to prove they were innocent instead of the police having to prove guilt. Nicole found lawyers who specialized in these cases, but their fees were more money than the family could possibly afford. Legal aid organizations were overwhelmed with too many similar cases and not enough lawyers. When she contacted news media, they expressed sympathy, but said civil forfeiture stories were too common to generate public interest unless someone famous was involved. At school, Marcus noticed his mother's red eyes and his grandfather's unusual silence. He wanted desperately to tell them what he had done. He wanted to tell them about his call to the FBI and how the nice agent said he might save many families. But the agent had been very clear with him. "This is our secret, Marcus. You might have saved many people, but you cannot tell anyone, not even your mom and grandpa, until we say it is safe. Can you keep this secret to help your family?" Marcus had promised, but carrying that secret while watching his family suffer was the hardest thing he had ever done in his short life. Across the city, the stolen money was being moved and laundered. Derek had deposited his share into an offshore account linked to a fake identity. Wells used her money to pay down her gambling debts. Romano transferred his share into a cryptocurrency wallet that he thought could not be traced. Each transaction was tracked and recorded and added to the growing mountain of evidence that Linda was building. But for the Crawford family, all of this was invisible. They saw only injustice without any remedy. They saw power without accountability. They saw a future slipping away for a child who deserved so much better. Linda stood in front of a huge holographic display showing the expanding map of corruption. Each glowing point represented a person or institution that had been touched by the stolen money. What had started as an investigation into one police precinct had grown into something much larger and more disturbing. The quantum markers had revealed connections Linda had not expected. Captain Morrison's network reached far beyond just dirty cops. There were lawyers who helped launder the money. There were judges who dismissed complaints without proper investigation. There were city officials who buried oversight reports. There were even federal prosecutors who had refused to pursue cases that might expose the operation. Carlos manipulated the hologram to show different clusters of connections. We have documented 47 illegal seizures in just the last 6 months. Total value is 8.3 million credits. And that is only Morrison's network. We are finding evidence of similar operations in 4 other precincts across the city. Linda traced a line through the display following the flow of Samuel's money. His $75,000 had been split among 6 officers. From there, it divided into dozens of smaller transactions. Some money disappeared into offshore accounts. Other amounts were used to buy luxury goods. A surprising amount went to political campaigns buying protection from elected officials who would fight against any reform efforts. Look at this, Carlos said while highlighting one particularly complex connection. Derek's share went into an account controlled by Councilman Gary Pierce. Pierce sits on the Police Oversight Committee. He has killed every proposed reform bill for the last 3 years. Linda felt the familiar anger that had kept her going through months of careful, painstaking work. This corruption was not just a few bad officers. It was an entire system carefully built to exploit vulnerable people while protecting the guilty. The database showed victims, hundreds and hundreds of them stretching back years. An immigrant family whose life savings were seized during a traffic stop. A small business owner whose cash receipts were taken and never returned. A military veteran whose disability check was confiscated. Each case followed the same pattern. People who were unlikely to have resources or knowledge to fight back. People targeted by officers who knew the system would protect them no matter what they did. What made the Crawford case special was not that it was unique, but that it had been anticipated and prepared for. The quantum markers provided evidence that would hold up in any court. No judge could dismiss this case, and no prosecutor could refuse to pursue it without exposing themselves as part of the conspiracy. Linda's supervisor, Assistant Director Helen Park, appeared as a hologram in the office. Her face was serious and concerned. I have been briefing the director about this case. We have approval to expand the investigation, but we need to move very carefully. Morrison retires in 60 days. If he makes it to Titan before we arrest him, extradition will be nearly impossible. The colony authorities there do not cooperate well with Earth law enforcement. Carlos suggested the obvious solution. We can arrest Morrison right now. We have more than enough evidence to convict him 10 times over. Linda shook her head. But do we have enough to get everyone else? Morrison is not the only captain involved in this corruption. If we move too soon, the others will run and hide. We need to identify every single player in this network before we strike. Park considered this carefully. You have 3 weeks. Continue your surveillance and document everything. But be ready to move immediately on my order. If Morrison shows any signs of running early, we arrest him that same day. The hologram faded, leaving Linda and Carlos alone with their ever-growing web of corruption. They worked in silence for hours, cataloging new connections and documenting money flows. They were building the kind of complete, comprehensive case that could not be dismissed or reduced through plea bargains. A younger agent named Sophie Turner entered with a new report. We have been monitoring social media and civilian communications under the authority of our warrant. There is something important you need to see. She projected a series of messages onto the displays. The messages came from a group calling itself the Seize Justice Network. These were victims of civil forfeiture, who had found each other online to share their stories. The group had grown to more than 300 people, all in the New Atlanta area. All of them claimed their property had been taken by police without real cause or due process. They are organizing, Turner explained. They are planning a protest at City Hall next week. They want media attention and public awareness. If this protest happens, it could alert our targets and make them suspicious. Linda studied the messages and recognized several names from her case files. These people had every right to be angry and demand justice. But their justified outrage could undermine months of careful investigative work. Can we delay them, she asked, without revealing our operation? Carlos shook his head firmly. Not without appearing to be part of the problem. If the FBI tells crime victims to wait quietly and not protest, we become the enemy in their eyes. Linda made a decision that went against every instinct she had as an investigator. Let the protest happen. We will adjust our timeline. If we have to move early to prevent our targets from being warned, then we move early. These people have already waited far too long for justice. It was a calculated risk, but it felt morally necessary. The investigation had always been about more than just building a legal case. It was about restoring faith in a system that had badly betrayed the people it was supposed to protect. Silencing victims to make her job easier would make her complicit in that betrayal. The protest at City Hall drew 200 people, which was far more than the organizers had expected. Samuel stood near the back of the crowd, feeling uncomfortable with all the attention, but unable to stay away. Nicole held Marcus's hand tightly, and the boy was unusually quiet as he watched the anger and pain displayed around him. People held signs that said things like, "Our money, no crime, and theft with a badge and justice, not seizure." News drones circled overhead, capturing footage that would appear on every major network. Local politicians, sensing which way public opinion was moving, suddenly appeared to express concern and promise investigations. A woman named Rita Chen took the microphone and her voice shook with emotion. "They took my husband's business savings, 50,000 credits he earned, through 15 years of hard work. They said it looked suspicious to have that much cash. We are immigrants and we trust banks less than most people. Now our restaurant has closed. My husband had a heart attack from the stress. And the police department says the money has already been spent on equipment and cannot be returned." The crowd erupted in sympathetic outrage. More stories followed, and each one was a variation on the same terrible theme. Ordinary people victimized by the very institution meant to protect them. People left with no recourse and no hope of getting justice. In an unmarked surveillance van 3 blocks away, Linda watched the protest through multiple camera feeds. Every instinct told her this was going to trigger a response from Morrison's network. Corrupt institutions did not collapse quietly. They fought back, and usually by doubling down on the very behavior that had exposed them in the first place. She was right. That evening, Morrison called an emergency meeting of his network. The FBI monitoring systems captured every word. The man's rage was clear even through electronic transmission. This protest is a serious problem. Media attention means public scrutiny. Scrutiny means investigations we cannot control like we control the internal ones. We need to shut this movement down immediately. Lieutenant Dixon asked the obvious question. How do we do that? We cannot arrest 200 people for exercising their constitutional rights to protest. Morrison's smile was cold and cruel. We do not arrest them. We discredit them. Find the leaders of this movement. Dig deep into their backgrounds. Everyone has something they want to keep hidden. We leak the right information to the right journalists, and suddenly these victims become criminals trying to game the system and get money they do not deserve. Derek spoke up eagerly. What about the old man? Crawford. His family was visible at the protest. We could make an example there that would scare the others. The quantum markers in the surveillance equipment recorded Morrison's thoughtful nod. Crawford is a war veteran and has a perfectly clean record. That makes it harder but not impossible. Look into the grandson instead. Kids that age there is always something. School fights or discipline problems or petty theft. Anything we can use to suggest the family is not as innocent as they appear to be. In the van, Carlos looked physically ill. They are planning to target an 8-year-old child to protect their corruption. This is beyond anything I imagined. Linda's face was like stone, but her eyes burned with cold fury. We move tonight. Get all the tactical teams into position immediately. I want simultaneous arrests at every target location. Morrison, Hayes, Dixon, Wells, Romano, Butler, and every other person we have identified as part of this network. We do this clean and by the book with overwhelming force so nobody can claim we made mistakes. Carlos asked about their supervisor's 3-week timeline. What about Park's orders to wait? Linda's voice was firm and final. I will take full responsibility for moving the timeline up, but I'm not going to sit here and wait while they plan to target a child to cover up their crimes. We have enough evidence. More than enough. It is time to end this. The next 6 hours were a carefully choreographed operation involving hundreds of people. FBI tactical teams moved into position at 17 different locations across New Atlanta. Federal prosecutors were briefed on the evidence and prepared indictments. Judges reviewed arrest warrants and signed them with unusual speed once they saw the quantum marker data and recordings. At precisely 11 o'clock that night, the operation began simultaneously at all locations. Captain Morrison was arrested in his home and dragged from his bed in front of his wife, who could not believe what was happening. The FBI agents showed him the quantum marker data displaying in precise detail every transaction, every stolen dollar, and every victim. His face went gray as he realized the full scope of what the FBI had documented over months of investigation. Derek Hayes was taken at the warehouse, caught in the act of counting money from yet another illegal seizure. Lieutenant Dixon was arrested leaving a casino where he had been gambling with stolen funds. Sergeant Wells was found at her home desperately trying to delete financial records from her personal computer. But the FBI already had copies of everything. Officers Romano and Butler were arrested at their homes. In total, 23 people were arrested that night. Police officers and lawyers and one judge and 2 city council members and various other people who had helped launder the stolen money. Each arrest was carefully documented. Each person was read their constitutional rights. Each piece of evidence was meticulously catalogued according to procedure. By morning, the news of the massive raids had spread across the entire city. The same journalists who had covered the protest just one day before now scrambled to report on the huge corruption scandal. Federal prosecutors held a press conference laying out the scope of the investigation and the strength of the evidence they had gathered. They showed charts and graphs demonstrating the flow of money. They played audio recordings of the corrupt officers discussing their crimes. They explained the quantum marker technology that had made the case impossible to deny or dismiss. In his modest home in the historic district, Samuel Crawford woke early to find federal agents at his door. His first instinct was fear because a lifetime of experience had taught him that law enforcement at your doorstep rarely meant anything good. But Agent Martinez's face was gentle and kind as she identified herself and asked if she could come inside. Nicole joined her father at the door with Marcus standing between them. The boy's eyes were very wide. Linda knelt down to Marcus's level, and her normally serious face broke into a rare warm smile. "You are very brave, young man. Your call to our tip line months ago started all of this. You may have saved hundreds of families." Marcus looked at his mother and grandfather, and guilt and relief fought for control of his young face. "I am sorry I kept a secret from you. The FBI agent said I had to keep it secret. She said it would help our family, and lots of other families too." Nicole pulled her son into a fierce, tight hug and tears streamed down her face. "You did exactly the right thing, baby. You did the right thing." Linda stood and addressed Samuel directly with respect in her voice. "Dr. Crawford, I owe you and your family a sincere apology. We knew about the planned seizure in advance. We had marked the bills in your withdrawal specifically, so we could trace them through the corrupt network. We could have warned you and prevented the theft. But doing so would have compromised months of investigation into a massive criminal conspiracy." Samuel sank into his chair as the revelation overwhelmed him. "You used us. You let that officer steal from me. You let my family suffer and worry. All of it was to build your case against them." Linda's voice was heavy with the moral weight of that decision. "Yes, and I understand completely if you are angry with me and the FBI. What I can tell you is that because of your case and because of the marked money your grandson helped us trace, we arrested 23 people last night. We have documented hundreds of victims across multiple years. We have recovered millions of credits in stolen assets. The systemic corruption that victimized your family has been exposed and will be fully prosecuted." She held out a secure data chip to Samuel. "This contains account numbers where your money has been frozen as evidence. All 75,000 credits plus interest will be returned to you within 48 hours. Additionally, the FBI has a victims' compensation program. Given the circumstances and the crucial role your family played in this investigation, I am personally authorized to expedite any claims you wish to file for damages." Samuel took the chip with hands that trembled and stared at it as if he could not believe what it represented. "My grandson's surgery. Do we still have time for it?" "Marcus turns 9 in 3 months, Nicole said, and her voice shook. "The doctors said we have until then to do the neural repair or it becomes permanent." "You will have the money this week," Linda promised. "And if I may suggest, the Bureau has professional connections with some of the best neural specialists in the entire solar system. I can personally make sure you get appointments with the top doctors." Over the next few days, the full scope of the FBI investigation became public knowledge. Media reported in exhaustive detail about the corruption network and the hundreds of victims and the millions in stolen assets. Public outrage was universal and crossed all political lines. Even police unions, which typically protected their members no matter what, released statements, strongly condemning the arrested officers. Captain Morrison, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in a federal prison, agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors. His detailed testimony revealed connections to similar corruption operations in 12 other cities. This led to a cascade of additional investigations and arrests across the country. The corruption, it turned out, was far more widespread than even the FBI had initially suspected. Derek Hayes and his fellow officers were confronted with the quantum marker evidence and Morrison's testimony against them. They had no choice except to plead guilty. The judge was a strict, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Lee. She showed absolutely no mercy during the sentencing hearing. "You betrayed the sacred trust placed in you by the public," she said, and her voice was cold with contempt. "You targeted vulnerable people. You stole from families in desperate need. You did all of this secure in the arrogant belief that your badges would protect you from consequences. They will not protect you. This court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law." Derek Hayes received a sentence of 30 years in federal prison. Captain Morrison got 45 years. The other officers received sentences ranging from 15 to 35 years. None of them would be eligible for parole for at least a decade. Their careers were destroyed. Their freedom was gone. Their reputations were ruined. The same arrogance that had made them believe they were untouchable had led directly to their downfall. But the real lasting change came in the aftermath of the arrests and convictions. The New Atlanta Police Department underwent a complete top-to-bottom restructuring. The police chief resigned in disgrace, as did 3 deputy chiefs who had known about the corruption, but done nothing. New leadership was brought in from outside the city with clear mandates to rebuild trust with the community and implement strong oversight systems. The city council held emergency sessions and passed sweeping reforms to civil asset forfeiture laws. The new laws said officers could no longer seize property without first charging someone with an actual crime. All seizures had to be reviewed by independent oversight boards made up of citizens, not police. Money from forfeitures could no longer be used to supplement police department budgets, which removed the financial incentive that had encouraged abuse. These reforms, born from the suffering of the Crawford family, began to spread to other cities and states. Within 1 year, 17 states had passed similar legislation. The federal government started reviewing its own civil forfeiture policies at the national level. What had started with one elderly man's traffic stop had evolved into a national reckoning with a broken and corrupt system. 2 months after the arrest, Samuel sat in a hospital waiting room while his grandson underwent the delicate neural repair procedure. Nicole paced back and forth, unable to sit still because of her anxiety. Agent Martinez had kept her word and connected them with the best specialists. The surgery was complex and risky, but the doctors were confident about success. After 6 long hours, the lead surgeon emerged with a tired but genuine smile. The procedure was completely successful. Marcus will need physical therapy and rehabilitation for several months, but we expect full recovery. He is young and his brain has remarkable ability to heal itself. In 6 months, you will not even be able to tell there was ever any damage. Samuel wept, but not from sadness. These were tears of overwhelming relief and joy. His gamble and his 3 years of saving and his grandson's brave choice to contact the FBI had all led to this beautiful moment. Justice had been served. Corruption had been exposed and punished. And most importantly, a child would have the healthy future he deserved. 1 year after the dramatic arrests, Agent Linda Martinez stood before a packed auditorium at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Her detailed case study on the New Atlanta corruption investigation had become required reading for every new agent and officer in training across the country. Today she was giving the important keynote address on modern investigative techniques and the critical importance of protecting civil rights while pursuing justice. The quantum marker technology we employed, she explained to the very attentive crowd, is now standard procedure in civil rights investigations across the entire solar system. But the real lesson of this case is not about technology or tactics. It is about remembering who we serve and why we serve them. She pulled up a hologram showing the network map from her investigation. This criminal operation victimized over 400 families that we know of, and possibly thousands more that we have not yet documented. Each point on this map represents not just a transaction or a piece of evidence, but a real human being whose life was damaged by the very people who were supposed to protect them. The image shifted to show Samuel photographed at the protest that had accelerated the investigation. This man is Dr. Samuel Crawford. He is a decorated military veteran who spent 20 years studying alien biology on Mars. He saved money for 3 years to pay for his grandson's life-saving medical procedure. An officer stole that money based solely on racial prejudice and the opportunity for personal profit. That single act of theft had consequences that rippled across our entire system of justice. Martinez continued, and her voice took on greater intensity. But out of that terrible injustice came something remarkable and hopeful. An 8-year-old boy named Marcus Crawford saw his grandfather's pain and made the brave choice to contact our tip line. That single call from a child started an investigation that exposed corruption in 17 cities. It led to the arrest of over 100 officers and officials. It triggered reform legislation in multiple jurisdictions across the country. One child's courage literally changed everything. The auditorium was completely silent, with every person focused intently on her words. Humanity has spread across 3 solar systems, Martinez said. We have discovered alien life forms. We have terraformed hostile planets. We have built colonies that seemed impossible just a century ago. We have achieved technological marvels that would have been considered pure magic by our ancestors. But none of that impressive progress matters at all if we cannot ensure basic justice for our own people. She paused to let the weight of that statement settle over the audience. The Crawford case taught me something crucial about our work. Corruption does not just harm individual victims. It undermines the entire foundation of our civilization. When ordinary people cannot trust those who enforce our laws, then the system itself becomes meaningless. When systems designed to protect citizens instead become weapons of exploitation, we risk destroying everything our species has built. The hologram shifted again, showing Marcus's most recent school photo. The boy looked healthy and happy and full of life. Today, Marcus is a normal 9-year-old child who loves mathematics and dreams of becoming an engineer. His mother, Nicole, has started a non-profit organization that helps other victims of civil asset forfeiture navigate the complex legal system. His grandfather, Samuel, has become a powerful advocate for police reform and speaks at schools and community centers about the vital importance of accountability. And the officers who victimized them, Martinez continued, they sit in federal prison where they belong. Their careers are destroyed. Their legacy is one of shame rather than honor. Captain Frank Morrison, who spent 20 years building a corruption network, will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. Officer Derek Hayes, who saw an elderly black man and saw only an opportunity for theft, now serves 30 years. Justice was served not just in their convictions, but in ensuring their crimes led to systemic changes that will prevent others from following their evil path. Martinez concluded her speech with words that would be quoted in law enforcement training materials across human space for years to come. We are the guardians of civilization's highest values. We are the thin line between order and chaos and between justice and tyranny. But we are not above the laws we enforce. We are not entitled to abuse the power that has been entrusted to us by society. And when we fail in our sacred duties and when we become predators rather than protectors, we betray not just our immediate victims, but every single person who has ever sworn an oath to serve and protect. The Crawford case reminds us that one person's courage and one family's refusal to be silenced and one child's determination to do what is right can change absolutely everything. That is the standard we must hold ourselves to every single day. That is the legacy we must build for future generations. The auditorium erupted in sustained applause that lasted several minutes. After her powerful speech, Martinez returned to her office to find a message waiting for her. It was from Samuel Crawford. The text was simple but deeply heartfelt, and it moved her more than she expected. Agent Martinez, the message read, I wanted you to know that Marcus received a special award at his school today for his science project on quantum physics. His teacher said he has a natural gift for understanding complex systems. Nicole's nonprofit organization has successfully helped 50 families recover their wrongly seized assets this year. And I am teaching a weekly class at the community college about civic responsibility and the importance of standing up for what is right even when it is difficult or dangerous. What happened to our family was terrible and painful. But what has come from that suffering has been beautiful and meaningful. Thank you for turning our worst moment into something that matters. With deep gratitude, Samuel Crawford. Martinez read the message twice and allowed herself a rare moment of pure satisfaction. The investigation had taken 18 long months from start to finish. The trial phase had consumed another full year. The reforms were still being implemented and refined across the country, but the core mission had been accomplished completely. Corruption exposed and punished. Victims vindicated and compensated. And most importantly, a broken system improved for the benefit of future generations. That evening, Linda attended a ceremony at FBI headquarters in Washington. Director Park was personally presenting awards to all the agents who had worked on the massive New Atlanta case. When Martinez's name was called, she walked to the podium to receive the Bureau's highest honor for investigative excellence and dedication to justice. But as she held the heavy medal in her hands, Martinez thought not about her own accomplishment or recognition. She thought instead about an 8-year-old boy who had been brave enough to call a tip line. She thought about an elderly man who had refused to let injustice define or defeat him. She thought about a daughter who had turned her family's pain into a powerful force for helping others in similar situations. Across the solar system in colonial settlements, on Mars and Europa and Titan and in the underground cities of Mercury, and the floating research habitats of Venus, humans were building an ambitious civilization among the stars. They faced challenges their ancestors could never have imagined. Hostile alien environments, potential contact with unknown species, the vast empty distances between inhabited worlds. But the Crawford case had reminded everyone of an important truth. The greatest challenges facing humanity were not external but internal. The struggle for justice and equality and basic human dignity continued regardless of how far humanity traveled from its home world. The eternal battle against corruption and prejudice and abuse of power required constant vigilance from every generation. In his comfortable home in New Atlanta, Samuel helped Marcus with his school homework. The boy's repaired neural pathways allowed him to grasp difficult concepts that would have been completely impossible before the successful surgery. Nicole was in the living room video conferencing with a family in New Phoenix, whose assets had been unjustly seized by local police. She was patiently guiding them through the recovery process step by step. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary home, but it represented something extraordinary and important: the triumph of justice over corruption, the victory of courage over fear, the power of hope over despair. The quantum marker technology that had tracked the stolen money through the corruption network was now being used in civil rights investigations across all of human space. The comprehensive reforms triggered by the Crawford case had been adopted by colonial governments throughout the solar system. The inspiring story of how one family's suffering had led to meaningful, systemic change was now taught in schools and studied by law students and referenced in legal arguments from Mercury to Titan. And somewhere, out in the vast darkness of space, humanity continued its steady expansion, carrying with it the eternal struggle to build a society truly worthy of its highest ideals and noblest aspirations. The Crawford case had proven something essential about human nature. Even in a future of unimaginable technology and impressive interstellar civilization, the most powerful force in the universe remained the courage of ordinary individuals who simply refused to accept injustice. That was humanity's true strength and defining characteristic, the quality that separated humans from every other known species across the galaxy. Not the ability to build faster ships or develop better weapons or terraform hostile worlds, but the deep capacity to recognize wrong and fight against it and create something better and more just from the struggle. It was what made humanity worth celebrating, worth defending, worth taking to the stars. It was why in the end, despite all challenges and setbacks, humanity would prevail and thrive. Marcus finished his homework and ran outside to play with neighborhood children. Nicole ended her video call and started preparing dinner. Samuel sat in his favorite chair reading news about the latest reforms being proposed in the colonial legislatures. The evening was peaceful and ordinary, but that ordinary peace had been hard-won through courage and sacrifice, through one family's willingness to become part of something larger than themselves, through an 8-year-old boy's simple decision to call for help, through a federal agent's determination to see justice done no matter the cost. The quantum markers that had made the case possible were tiny, invisible trackers, but they had illuminated a massive network of corruption. They had provided undeniable proof that could not be dismissed or ignored. They represented the best of human innovation being used to uphold the best of human values. In police academies across Earth and Mars and the outer colonies, new officers took their oaths. They swore to protect and serve. They promised to uphold the law. They committed to treating all people with dignity and respect, and they studied the Crawford case as an example of what happened when officers betrayed those solemn promises. The reforms continued to spread like ripples across water. 5 years after the initial arrests, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling, citing the Crawford case extensively. Civil asset forfeiture could no longer be used as a revenue-generating tool for law enforcement. Property could only be seized after a criminal conviction, not before. The burden of proof was shifted back where it belonged. The government had to prove guilt, Citizens no longer had to prove innocence. It was a fundamental restoration of constitutional principles that had been eroded over decades. Samuel was invited to attend the Supreme Court session when the ruling was announced. He sat in the gallery with Nicole and Marcus, who was now 13 years old, and already taking advanced classes in mathematics and science. When the Chief Justice read the majority opinion, she mentioned the Crawford family by name. This family's courage in the face of injustice, she said, reminds us why these constitutional protections exist. They are not abstract legal principles but vital safeguards that protect real people from the abuse of government power. The Crawford case stands as a testament to what is possible when ordinary citizens refuse to accept corruption as inevitable. After the session, reporters surrounded Samuel asking for his reaction. He spoke carefully and thoughtfully. "I never wanted to be famous or be part of history. I just wanted to save my grandson. But if our suffering has helped prevent other families from going through the same nightmare, then it was worth it. Every moment of pain and fear and uncertainty was worth it if it means the system is better now than it was before." Marcus stood beside his grandfather and spoke with surprising maturity for his age. "I was scared when I called the FBI. I thought maybe I was making a mistake, but my teacher had taught us about civic responsibility and standing up for what is right. I knew what that police officer did to my grandfather was wrong. I knew our family needed help. So I called. I am glad I did." The story was broadcast across the solar system. In classrooms on Earth and Mars and Europa, children watched the interview and learned about courage and justice. Teachers used the Crawford case to discuss government accountability and citizen participation. The case became more than just a legal precedent. It became a cultural touchstone and a reminder of shared values. Linda Martinez had retired from the FBI after 30 years of service. She now taught at the academy training new agents. Her classes were always full because everyone wanted to learn from the agent who had brought down the largest corruption network in modern history. But Linda always redirected credit away from herself. "I was just doing my job," she would tell her students. The real heroes were the Crawford family. They endured suffering so that we could build a better system. Never forget that our work is not about statistics or arrest numbers. It is about real people whose lives depend on us doing our jobs with integrity. One of her students raised a hand. "Agent Martinez, do you think corruption like this could happen again?" Linda considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said honestly. "Corruption is not something you eliminate once and then forget about. It is something every generation has to fight against continuously. Power will always attract people who want to abuse it. That is why we need strong oversight. That is why we need whistleblowers protected by law. That is why we need citizens who pay attention and speak up when they see wrongdoing." The Crawford case did not end corruption. It reminded us that corruption can be defeated when good people refuse to stay silent. Derek Hayes sat in his prison cell reading about the Supreme Court ruling. He had served 7 years of his 30-year sentence. He would be an old man before he was released if he ever was. His wife had divorced him. His children refused to speak to him. His fellow officers who had once protected him now treated him like a traitor to the badge. He had lost everything because of his greed and prejudice. Sometimes late at night, Derek thought about that traffic stop. He thought about Samuel's face and the fear in the old man's eyes. He thought about how easy it had seemed at the time. Just another seizure, just another pile of cash that no one would miss. He had never imagined that one stop would destroy his entire life and expose a network that had operated for decades. Morrison was in the same prison, but they were not allowed contact. The former captain had aged rapidly in prison. His hair was white. His face was deeply lined. The man who had once commanded respect and fear was now just another elderly inmate, counting the days until death. The other officers from the network were scattered across various federal facilities. Some had found religion. Some had become bitter and angry. Some had simply accepted their fate with resignation, but all of them had lost the one thing they had valued most, the power that came with the badge. Meanwhile, the families they had victimized were rebuilding their lives. Rita Chen, whose husband had suffered a heart attack after their business savings were seized, had reopened her restaurant with money returned by the courts. The immigrant family who had lost everything now ran a successful business. The disabled veteran who had his benefits seized now advocated for other veterans facing similar injustice. Each victim had found a way to transform their pain into something constructive. On Mars, the colonial government passed comprehensive police reform legislation based directly on the Crawford case. On Europa, the small but growing human settlement wrote civil rights protections into their founding charter. On Titan, where Morrison had hoped to escape justice, new extradition treaties made it impossible for criminals to hide in the outer colonies. The changes rippled outward, touching every corner of human civilization. Marcus graduated from high school at age 16 and was accepted to the best university in the solar system. He planned to study quantum physics and neuroscience. His personal statement for the application had moved the admissions committee. "I am alive and healthy today because of technology and because of justice. I want to dedicate my life to advancing both." He never forgot that his phone call had started everything. Sometimes the weight of it seemed too heavy for one person to carry, but his mother reminded him that he had not been alone. "You made the call," she would tell him, "but Agent Martinez did the investigation and your grandfather showed courage and thousands of people supported the reforms. Change does not come from one person acting alone. It comes from many people, each doing what they can." Samuel lived to see his grandson graduate from university with highest honors. He was 80 years old and his health was declining, but his mind was sharp. He attended the graduation ceremony in a wheelchair, but his smile was bright with pride. Marcus, in his speech, thanked his grandfather for the sacrifice that had made his education possible. Nicole's nonprofit had grown into a national organization with chapters in every major city. They had helped over 2,000 families recover wrongly seized assets. They had trained lawyers to handle these cases pro bono. They had lobbied for reforms at every level of government. The organization was named the Crawford Foundation for Justice, and it had become one of the most respected civil rights groups in the country. Linda attended the foundation's annual gala as a guest of honor. She sat at a table with Samuel and Nicole and Marcus and other families whose lives had been changed by the case. The room was full of people who had fought against injustice and won. The keynote speaker was a young woman who had been a victim of civil forfeiture as a teenager. "Because of the Crawford reforms," she said, "I got my property back. Because of their courage, I learned that the system could be changed. Now I am in law school, and I plan to spend my career protecting others from what happened to me. That is the legacy of this case. Not just justice for one family, but inspiration for countless others to keep fighting." As the evening ended, Linda found herself standing with Samuel looking out at the crowd. "You changed the world," she told him. Samuel shook his head gently. "We all did. You and Carlos and Sophie and every agent who worked the case. Marcus, who made the call. Nicole, who turned pain into purpose. The protesters who refused to stay silent. The prosecutors and judges who did their jobs with integrity. The legislators who passed reforms. Change is never the work of one person. It is the work of everyone who decides that injustice is not acceptable." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the future unfold before them. A future built on courage and justice and the unshakable belief that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they refused to give up.